Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the family of a Rwandan government critic who somehow ended up in the hands of police in Kigali believes that he was kidnapped following a trip to Dubai. Paul Rusesabagina denies accusations of sponsoring terrorism in his homeland. Also, in South Africa, precautions brought in to tackle the spread of coronavirus in the African nation worst hit by the pandemic have affected the way that communities traditionally bury the dead. And in Togo, Aruka Studios prides itself on giving African animators a chance to create movies which better reflect stories rooted in the culture of local audiences than those offered by Western outfits. But first, the daughter of an arrested prominent critic of Rwandan President Paul Kagame believes that her father was kidnapped after traveling from his home in the US to Dubai last week. Paul Rusesabagina lives in the US, but appeared before the press in Kigali in handcuffs on Monday. He was portrayed in the film Hotel Rwanda as a hero who saved more than 1,200 people from the country's 1994 genocide. Rwanda says that he had been subject to an arrest warrant and that there was international cooperation to detain him, but they haven't elaborated further than that. Now, he denies accusations of supporting terror groups. I'm joined now by Michaela Wrong, who's a journalist and author who's written extensively on Kagame's Rwanda. Michaela, so you've actually spoken to Rusesabagina's family. What do they think happened to him? How did he end up in Rwandan custody?
Well, to be honest, they're very confused. I spoke to his son, his 28-year-old son, Trésor, and he was saying that he'd been speaking to his father normally, assumed he was in lockdown in Texas, and then the next thing he hears is he's been arrested and he's on TV and is arrested in Kigali. They know that he went to Dubai. They don't know why he went to Dubai, and they don't know how he got from Dubai to Kigali. So there's lots of speculation about rendition, about capture, seizure, that possibly he was drugged to make him compliant. But really, the family themselves don't really know, and they're very concerned because they haven't had any contact with him, any direct contact with him, and they don't even know if he's got a lawyer.
Now, Rusesabagina has denied accusations from the government that he's somehow been involved in sponsoring terror groups in the country. Does he actually pose any kind of a threat in that respect to Paul Kagame?
Well, it looks like the Rwandans are going to go very hard on the fact that he was part of a coalition of groups that were opposed to and critical of Kagame's regime, and that part of that coalition of groups had an armed wing that was active and had attacked at one stage Rwanda. But I think really the threat he poses is one of reputation. He's extremely well connected. Everyone knows he's probably the most famous Rwandan in the US. Everyone knows the film. Everyone knows Don Cheadle's portrayal of him. It's an extremely sympathetic portrayal of this hotel manager who saved all the Tutsis who were hiding in the hotel. And he has the ear of a lot of celebrities, a lot of people in the US establishment, a lot of senators and congressmen who matter. And the US is a major donor to Rwanda. So in that respect, he could have a lot of reputational impact on Rwanda. And it seems to me that Kagame is taking a risk by arresting him.
And there has been, since his arrest, a lot of concern from human rights activists. Why is that? Why are they concerned about what happens next for him now that he is in Rwandan custody?
Well, there's a really long tradition and track record of people who stand up to Kagame's Rwanda and come to very sticky ends. And it dates back to the mid-1990s, soon after the genocide, when we see Hutu minister Seth Sendashonga, former interior minister, being assassinated in Nairobi. Supposedly because he was organizing a group that was going to try and topple Kagame's regime. And we see this pattern of opposition activists being either silenced, intimidated, jailed, or taken out, assassinated, even if they're abroad. For example, just in the last year, we've seen Kizito Mihigo, who is a celebrity gospel singer, who was arrested and was then released, was trying to get out of the country, and he was rearrested and died mysteriously in police custody. We've had in Congo, we've had the Nobel Prize winner, the Congolese Nobel Prize winner, Denis Mukwege, who's been saying he's been getting death threats from Rwanda because he's been speaking about Rwanda's track record of mass killings inside the Congo. We've seen the former head of intelligence in 2014, Patrick Karegeya, who was strangled in South Africa. We've seen the former head of the armed forces, General Kayumba Nyamwasa, who was shot in South Africa. And, there's a common factor behind all these attacks, these killings. They're pretty much, the arrow points fairly directly to Kagame and all these attacks. So there's good reason to be very concerned for anybody who ends up in police custody inside Kigali at the moment.
Thanks very much. Michaela Wrong there speaking to us in response to the arrest earlier this week of a prominent critic of the Rwandan government. Well, in other news, Zimbabwe said that foreign farmers who had land seized by the government in 2000 could have their properties back. About 4,000 farms owned by white people were seized following land reforms under former President Robert Mugabe. They were meant to address racial imbalances of land ownership in Zimbabwe, but ultimately contributed to the country's economic collapse. Only about 37 foreign farmers who had special protections have now been given the go-ahead to apply to regain their lost land titles. Last month, the government agreed to compensate farmers who were kicked off their land with a $3.5 billion deal that excluded the return of property. Well, in South Africa, health precautions brought in to tackle the spread of coronavirus in the African nation worst affected by the pandemic have hit the way the communities traditionally bury their dead. Social distancing has forced changes to mourning rituals, making grieving all the more difficult. Nicolas Chemin has more.
COVID-19 has made it much harder for South Africans to mourn their dead. Traditional burial practices like overnight vigils have been set aside. The ritual that has been most disrupted by the new regulations is the washing of the body by the family before the burial. Funeral parlours are overwhelmed.
COVID-19 has had a big impact in our business in the terms as we've never been this busy before. In our culture, in the African culture, normally we bury on weekends, on Saturdays and Sundays. It's completely changed now because now we're actually burying every single day.
Before COVID-19, hundreds of people would often attend funerals. Now the limit is 50 mourners.
People rely on family networks to assist them and support them through times of bereavement like this. And that's, the one potential area of impact is that people no longer have that level of support and are no longer able to process trauma and bereavement in the way that they were used to before.
Those who break the regulations face a fine or up to 6 months in prison. But the authorities have started to ease rules, and many South Africans hope that former rituals will soon be allowed again.
Now, more and more animation movie studios are popping up across the continent. In Togo, Aruka Studios is teaching young directors on the job, as a lack of funding and training does mean it's hard to break into the industry any other way. The outfit prides itself on telling stories rooted in African folklore. Our team went to meet theirs.
Je suppose que toi, tu voudrais que je t'aide à te lever.
Il me faut plus de profondeur dans la voix.
Pourquoi me poser des questions?
Au lieu de me rendre ma mère,
Que tu as fait t'enlever par ton maudit oiseau.
il faudra que tu répondes correctement aux 3 questions que je vais te poser.
Togo's first animation studio is buzzing with the energy of a start-up. In just 3 years, Aruka Studio and its founder have already built a solid reputation.
C'est le réalisateur auquel des auteurs comme moi, des producteurs font appel pour des projets de films et des séries d'animation parce qu'on sait bien qu'en matière de 2D, de techniques traditionnelles d'animation, Boris est clairement l'une des références.
With a dozen short films to his credit, Boris Capodenou strives to change the viewer's perspective.
On sait que les dessins animés peuvent passer beaucoup de messages, alors qu'aujourd'hui, on sait que tout le monde a des smartphones. On veut aller dans ce sens pour pouvoir atteindre ces personnes-là.
Animation can be cheaper than classic film production and offers more creative possibilities. However, due to the lack of vocational education in Togo, young people are trained for specific roles on the job.
Nous sommes en train de révéler en fait des gens qui ne se savaient pas compétents dans ce genre de domaine.
À la base, j'étais un fan de manga. Je dessinais que des Sangoku, des Naruto et tout ça.
Scripts used by the studio are all inspired by the richness of African cultures and landscape.
La plupart du temps, nous consommons tout ce qui est extérieur. On n'a pas d'histoire vraiment qui viennent de l'Afrique. Nous prenons le partage du message africain, des valeurs africaines.
Dans le temps, c'était les griots qui racontaient les histoires. Aujourd'hui, c'est un studio d'animation qui raconte l'histoire.
These local creatives take pride in helping young generations celebrate their heritage with 2D and 3D productions based on traditional stories, offering a reflection of their target audience, seldom seen in traditional animated cinema.
Looking good. Well, that's it though for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us and do so again if you can. Take care.